If an entire base mocked you for being a black woman, if they laughed because the aircraft you flew was a relic long past its prime, would you still climb into that cockpit knowing you were the only one left who could save 12 lives? They called it outdated. They called it useless. They called her reckless for even touching it. But to Naomi Carter, the old A-10 Warthog was not a relic. It was a living beast. Its scars and rivets were like her own, each one a memory of being underestimated, each one proof that she had survived. In the dim hangar, Naomi's hand rested on the cold skin of the hog. Her eyes held no swagger, no pride, only the steady flame of someone who had endured prejudice, loss, and silence. And just for a moment beneath the collar of her flight suit, the faint outline of an eagle tattoo caught the light. A symbol not of beauty, but of defiance. The other pilots never understood. They had their sleek fighters, their stealth, their speed. They could not comprehend why a woman like her still clung to this slow-armored beast. But what they could not see, what she alone understood, was that sometimes the only way to survive the impossible is to fly lower, slower, closer to the ground, where the fight is real. At dawn, she would return. The hog would crawl home, broken wings, shredded engines, bleeding. Naomi would stagger out her flight suit, torn her blood mixing with oil and smoke. And the same base that had laughed at her would stand in silence, their heads bowed, their hands raised in salute. But before that dawn could come, Naomi Carter would have to die and be reborn not once but again and again in the longest night of her life. At Iron Valley Air Base, the mountains stood like silent judges, their snow-capped ridges catching the cold light of morning. The base itself was a place of steel and pride, humming with the confidence of a new generation of pilots. Sleek F-35s and F-22s gleamed on the tarmac, their edges sharp against the sky. To many, they were the future. To Naomi Carter, they were a reminder of where she did not belong. Naomi was not the kind of pilot who filled the air with jokes or swagger. She walked with a steady, deliberate pace, her posture rigid with discipline, her gaze level. Some mistook that silence for arrogance. Others mistook it for weakness. They never considered it might be strength. She was a black woman in a world where most faces around her were not. And though the uniform was meant to erase difference, the sidelong glances, the whispered nicknames, and the quiet laughter made sure she never forgot. The young men of the base often circled her like crows, throwing offhand remarks that carried the sting of dismissal. Careful relic, girl. That old hog might not start this winter. She's just babysitting the museum piece. You know they keep her around for nostalgia, right? Naomi never answered. She didn't need to. Each word passed over her like wind over stone cold, but powerless to erode the surface. Yet inside she felt the weight. Every snicker wasn't just about her plane. It was about her. Too black, too female, too silent. Too much of everything they didn't value. And still every morning she walked out to the far end of the line where her Warthog waited. The A-10C Thunderbolt II to the world a relic. To Naomi it was a survivor. The hog was not sleek or graceful. Its broad wings sagged a little under the weight of time. Its engines growled like stubborn beasts, loud and unrefined. Its fuselage bore scars of decades of training runs, patched and repainted again and again. But Naomi knew every scar, every rivet, every sound it made when the wind pushed against its skin. Where others saw ugliness, she saw resilience. The titanium bathtub that cradled her seat wasn't elegant, but it was a shield thick enough to stop the rounds that killed pilots in other aircraft. The twin engines were not quiet, but they were redundant. One could be burning shredded, and the hog would still limp home. And the nose. The nose held the GIU-8 Avenger, a cannon so powerful it was built first, and the plane itself built around it. A beast of brute survival. It had been called many things. To Naomi, it was home. She remembered the first time she touched it. Her father, once a mechanic in the Air Force, had brought her as a girl to see an A-10 on display. He had told her, don't listen to the shine of planes. Listen to the heart of the machine. Some whisper, some roar. This one roars for the forgotten. She carried those words into every flight. But Naomi also carried something else, a wound deeper than prejudice. Around her neck hung a small silver pendant. On its back were etched letters and numbers, RF-92. It was all she had left of her younger brother, Robert Franklin. He had been a soldier caught in an ambush halfway across the world. Naomi had flown over the same desert skies, helpless as news came that his convoy had been shredded by fire. She was too far away, too slow to save him. The weight of his death was something no uniform or rank could take away. When the laughter of her peers grew sharp, Naomi's hand often slipped to that pendant. She rubbed the numbers between her fingers until her knuckles turned white. RF-92 wasn't just her brother's initials and year of birth. It was her reminder of a promise that she would never let men like him be abandoned again. On the tarmac, Naomi would run her hands slowly along the hog's cold flank, murmuring words no one else could hear. A ritual, a communion. She knew the smell of jet fuel, the groan of metal settling under weight, the subtle difference between a healthy hum and a wounded rattle. Where the young pilots trusted data links and readouts, Naomi trusted her hand and her ear. To them, she was a relic with a relic. To her, she was bonded to something that still had a fight left in it. And yet in the sterile, high-tech culture of Iron Valley, that bond set her apart. She didn't fit into their world of glass cockpits and digital speed. She belonged to another age, an age of grit, of steel, of muscle memory and sweat. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Naomi's silence was not emptiness. It was listening, listening to the machine, listening to the ghosts it carried, listening to the promise etched in silver against her heart. The mountains around Iron Valley had seen generations of pilots rise and fall. They did not care who laughed or who mocked. And deep inside, Naomi Carter knew one day soon, when those mountains swallowed hope itself, it would not be the fastest jet or the newest design that mattered. It would be the one everyone had forgotten. The sirens at Iron Valley shattered the morning calm. Their shrill metallic cry cut through the hangars, echoing against the steel beams and rattling through the bones of every man and woman on base. Pilots dropped their coffee cups. Crews sprinted for stations. And over the intercom came words that silenced even the cockiest Spectre 9 as pinned. Priority red. All flight leads to command immediately. Spectre 9. A team of 12 operators sent into the teeth of the mountains on a reconnaissance mission. Now the only thing between them and annihilation was time that was running out. The command briefing room buzzed with a sharp edge of fear disguised as confidence. A holographic map lit the air in cold blue, showing the jagged ridges of the surrounding range. Red icons pulsed like wounds across the digital landscape. Enemy armor columns entrenched anti-air systems overlapping radar fields. A net woven so tightly it seemed impossible to break. General Darius stood at the head of the table, his jaw clenched, his voice low. Spectre 9 is engaged in this ravine. They estimate less than 4 hours before their position is overrun. A hush fell. Then, like young stallions kicking at their gates, the F-35 flight leads broke into confident declarations. We'll take Shadow Squadron in low. Stealth package precision strike. We'll deploy standoff missiles. Quick and clean. One by one, the intelligence officer dismantled them all. His voice was tired but steady, each word striking like a hammer against hollow metal. Their low-frequency radars will light you up. You'll get one pass before they tear you apart. The jamming blocks missile guidance. Standoff strikes risk hitting our own men. Drones can't penetrate the EW screen. Gunships won't survive the SAM curtain. Each solution collapsed under the weight of logic. The room, once brimming with youthful bravado, dimmed into silence. For all their technology, for all their sleek stealth and cutting-edge systems, Iron Valley had nothing that could break through. Major Steele leaned forward, frustration etched on his face. Then what the hell do we have left throwing rocks? It was then the older intelligence officer spoke. His voice was almost reluctant, as though uttering heresy in this cathedral of digital war. There is one path, but only one kind of aircraft could make it. Heads turned. The silence deepened, charged with disbelief. Steele scoffed. You can't mean. But the officer went on, his eyes fixed on the twisting terrain projected before them. Their radars are tuned for high-speed threats. Their systems expect stealth at altitude. They are not built to counter something slow, armored, hugging the earth itself. Something that can loiter and fight in the mud. The word he did not speak hung in the air like a cursed warthog. The young pilots shifted in their seats, their sneers returning, but now tempered by unease. They glanced at one another as if someone had suggested digging trenches with bare hands. An A-10 against this, it was madness. At the back of the room, Naomi Carter sat alone. Her posture, still her eyes locked on the holographic map. She had not spoken a word since the briefing began. Her hand moved almost unconsciously to her chest, fingertips brushing against the silver pendant that bore her brother's initials, RF-92. The camera of the moment seemed to zoom in closer and closer until the chaos of the room dissolved. She was no longer hearing their arguments. She was tracing the ridges, the shadowed valleys, the serpent-like ravines. She was already flying them in her mind. What the others dismissed as suicide, Naomi saw as possibility. What they feared as madness, she recognized as the one path that still remained. The room emptied slowly after the briefing, but Naomi remained seated, her gaze fixed on the fading glow of the holographic map. The lines of mountains dissolved into darkness, yet in her mind they stayed harsh ridges, killing grounds, the path of a mission no sane pilot would volunteer for. Her stomach tightened. She had lost before. She knew what it was to receive a call too late, to fly too far, to arrive only in time to bring back silence. The memory pressed against her chest like a blade. Robert, her brother, had died in a firestorm she could not prevent. The sound of that radio call still lived inside her, etched deeper than any scar. And now the thought of 12 more voices turning into ghosts weighed on her shoulders until she could hardly breathe. Naomi pressed her hand against her pendant, the metal cold against her skin. A part of her wanted to rise, to speak, to say she would go. But another voice, old merciless, whispered back, "You'll fail them too." Major Steele's laughter cut the silence. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded, a smirk on his face. "Don't even think about it, Carter. You'll turn yourself into target practice. That museum piece can't dodge a lawn chair, let alone an S-400. The sting in his words wasn't in their sharpness, but in their certainty. Around them, a few of the younger pilots chuckled quietly, their eyes glinting with the same disdain. Naomi's jaw tightened. She could face enemy fire, but not the look of men who had already written her off, who believed she was unfit to even try. Her silence made Steele bolder. "Stay out of it. Leave this to real fighters. No one's asking you to throw your life away for a lost cause." Naomi turned her face away, unable to answer. His voice echoed the fear already alive inside her. Maybe he was right. Maybe she wasn't enough. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her flight suit. From an inner pocket, she pulled out a worn leather wallet. Tucked inside was a photograph, her brother Robert grinning in his fatigues, one arm thrown around her shoulders, the other holding up a makeshift sign that read, "Hold the line." The sight pierced her like a blade, but also anchored her. Robert's eyes in that photo were unbroken, defiant, alive. He had stood his ground even when it cost him everything. Naomi's breath slowed. The trembling in her hands ceased. She closed the wallet carefully, slipping it back into her suit. Her face hardened, her eyes steady. The doubt had not vanished, but something stronger rose to meet it. She might have been underestimated. She might have been mocked, but she would not let 12 more brothers die while she stayed silent. The refusal was already breaking. The hangar was quiet, now emptied of voices, its vast space filled only with the steady hum of fluorescent lights. Naomi walked slowly toward her hog, each step deliberate, as though the concrete itself might give way beneath her. She stopped in front of the nose, the cold gray skin of the aircraft looming above her like a silent sentinel. Her hand rose, gloved fingers brushing the metal, and suddenly she was no longer in Iron Valley. She was a little girl again, 10 years old, standing beside her father on an open tarmac in Georgia. The air smelled of oil and summer heat. Her father, still in his coveralls, wiped his hands with a rag as he guided her toward a massive A-10 parked in the sun. He had been a mechanic all his life. His hands calloused, his eyes tired but kind. "Don't let anyone tell you a machine is just metal," he said, crouching, so his eyes were level with hers. "Every plane has a heart. You don't need the newest, shiniest one. You need a heart that listens when it whispers. Do that, and it'll carry you through hell itself." He had placed her small hand against the side of the hog that day, the same way she now placed her hand against the worn fuselage. She remembered how the metal had felt warm from the sun, how her father's voice had been steady with faith. The memory faded, and Naomi was back in the cold of Iron Valley's hangar, staring at the same kind of beast her father had taught her to respect. Only now the stakes were higher, and the whispers were harder to hear. A shuffle of boots pulled her from her thoughts. Sergeant Alvarez, the chief of her ground crew, approached quietly. He was older, his hair streaked with gray, his uniform worn. He had served under too many commanders to be impressed by ranks or medals. What mattered to him were hands that knew what they were doing and eyes that didn't lie. Without a word, Alvarez placed his rough hand on the nose of the hog, just above where Naomi's hand rested. His touch was reverent, like someone greeting an old friend. He looked at her, his gaze steady. "She knows the way home," he said softly, "as long as someone believes in her." For the first time that day, Naomi felt her chest loosen. It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't a strategy or a guarantee of survival, but it was faith. Simple, unshaken faith from a man who had watched planes die and survive for decades. Naomi nodded once, her throat tight. Her father's words, Alvarez's faith, the hog's silent patience. It was enough to stir something inside her that Steele's mockery and her own doubt had tried to bury. The whispers were there, and she was ready to listen. When Naomi stepped onto the hangar floor the next morning, there was no more hesitation in her stride. The decision had already been made. She would fly, not because she sought glory, not because she craved recognition, but because 12 men were waiting, and the hog was the only path that still remained. The crew was already there, tools clattering softly against steel fuel lines, snaking like veins into the beast's flanks. Naomi pulled on her gloves, her face unreadable. This was no ordinary pre-flight check. This was ritual. This was covenant. She began her walk around each step, steady each motion and precise. Her gloved hand traced the thick armor plating along the cockpit, the titanium bathtub designed to shield her from fire. Her eyes scanned the landing gear, noting every bolt, every hydraulic line. She checked the fuel panels, the wing pylons loaded with Mavericks and hydropods, each weapon a silent promise. She crouched beneath the engines, the twin turbofans looming like great lungs. One breath, and they could roar her into the sky or wheeze out their last in smoke. She listened, not with her ears, but with the memory her father had taught her, a mechanic's sense for whispers. She checked the rivets, the seams, the trailing edges of the wings. Each touch was a prayer, each inspection a bond renewed. Sergeant Alvarez shadowed her silently, handing tools, nodding at her thoroughness. He said nothing more, he didn't need to. Their faith was shared, unspoken, sealed in the steel between them. At the far edge of the hangar, the young pilots gathered arms, folded their F-35 patches gleaming. Their eyes followed her movements with a mixture of disbelief and mocking curiosity. Some smirked, some shook their heads. "She's really going to try it," one whispered. Naomi ignored them. The hog didn't need their approval, and neither did she. Finally, she climbed the ladder into the cockpit. The canopy lowered with a hiss, sealing her inside the titanium shell. The outside world dimmed. The switches and gauges lit around her like stars in a private universe. Her fingers moved across them with calm efficiency, auxiliary power, hydraulics, avionics, weapon systems. The hog stirred awake, not sleek or graceful, but a live rumbling with the guttural growl of a beast too stubborn to die. The runway stretched before her like a narrow road into darkness. Ground control gave the clearance, their voices clipped and formal. She pushed the throttles forward. The hog did not leap, it lumbered slow and heavy, its engines straining under the burden of full ordnance. The F-35 pilots watching from the line exchanged looks of smug pity. But Naomi's eyes did not leave the horizon. She knew what they did not. The hog's strength was never in speed. It was in endurance. It was in stubbornness. It was in the refusal to quit. The wheels lifted almost reluctantly, the wide wings catching the morning air. The beast climbed low and steady, leaving the ground behind. And as the engines carried her toward the mountains, a quiet voice of narration underscored the truth. The mountains swallowed her whole. Within minutes of leaving Iron Valley, Naomi Carter was flying in a world stripped of light and mercy. Jagged cliffs rose like teeth on either side of her, the shadows of dusk sinking into their hollows. The hog's wide wings cut close to the rock, so close the wind curled against the surface and rattled her frame like a drum. This was a nap of the earth flying in its rawest form, hugging the terrain so tightly that the machine became another contour of the landscape. Naomi worked the stick and rudder pedals with a surgeon's patience, dipping into valleys, skimming rivers, threading ridgelines so narrow they seemed carved by a knife. She kept her altitude at just a few hundred feet lower than some skyscrapers, knowing every second below radar meant another breath for Spectre 9. Her displays flickered with warnings, the threat receiver humming as distant radars probed the sky above. She ignored them. She wasn't up there. She was down here, buried in the shadows. Her hands moved in rhythm with the hog's subtle shakes, trimming, correcting, coaxing the beast forward. But terrain was only the first enemy. The alarm came sudden, a high-pitched chirp that froze the breath in her lungs. Tunguska, a mobile anti-aircraft system hidden high on a ridge ahead. The screen lit with its signature. Before she could react, the night ripped open. Brilliant green tracers clawed through the darkness, streaking just behind her tail like a serpent's tongue. Naomi slammed the stick left, pulling into a brutal brake turn. G-forces crushed her chest, her vision tunneling. The hog groaned, metal shrieking as if protesting the abuse. She dove deeper into the canyon flares, spitting from the fuselage in bursts of white fire. Then came the tone no pilot ever forgets, sharp, unbroken, merciless. Missile lock. Her thumb stabbed the flare switch again. A shower of magnesium fireballs cascaded into the night, glowing like falling stars. She risked a glance back. A missile, its exhaust a screaming spear, hunted her through the gorge. For a breathless second it seemed locked into her soul. Then it veered, seduced by the bloom of flares, exploding in a white flash that lit the granite walls like lightning. The shock wave slammed the hog, rattling her bones. The alarm fell silent. She had survived barely. Naomi's chest heaved, sweat streaming beneath her helmet. That had been too close. A foot of error, a fraction of a second slower, and she would have been nothing but fire on the canyon floor. The radio crackled faint beneath a blanket of static. She leaned in, straining to hear. Spectre. Under fire. Losing. Position? Then screams, raw, unfiltered terror. The sound of men watching death descend. Naomi's hand tightened on the stick until her knuckles whitened. The voices bled through the interference, broken, desperate. Enemy armor. Closing. God, we can't. Her throat closed, memory crashing over her like a wave. Another call years ago. Another unit ambushed, another voice breaking into static. Her brother's voice snatched away by the same kind of chaos. She had been powerless then, chained by distance and orders. Not this time. She touched the pendant at her chest. The etched letters, RF-92, bit into her glove. A vow formed, quiet but unshakable. I cannot let them suffer my brother's fate. The hog steadied beneath her as though it too understood. She pushed the throttles forward, the engines roaring defiantly. The mountains still bristled with enemy guns. Radars still scoured the sky. But Naomi's focus sharpened into a single burning line of resolve. She would reach Spectre 9. She would not let 12 more brothers become ghosts. The first trial was over. The true gauntlet still lay ahead. The mountains opened into a wider basin, and for a moment Naomi thought she had room to breathe. But the hog's threat receiver erupted in a shrill, urgent scream, a sound every pilot knows is the voice of death. Her eyes flicked to the display. The contact was high-fast, descending like a hawk on its prey. Su-57. The Russian-built Predator sliced into view above the ridgeline, its silhouette sleek and sharp against the twilight sky. Twin afterburners flared blue-white as it banked its nose, dipping like a raptor stooping on a rabbit. The fighter was a masterpiece of speed and stealth, bristling with sensors and missiles. Against it, Naomi's hog looked like a lumbering farm animal. Broad wings, blunt nose, its engines roaring without finesse. The contrast could not have been clearer, predator and prey. The modern world and the relic. Naomi's heart pounded. She knew the truth: in open air she wouldn't last 30 seconds. The Su-57 could outrun her, outclimb her, outgun her at every distance. But here in the granite labyrinth of the mountains, the rules were different. The first missile came fast, a streak of fire, screaming down the ravine. Naomi shoved the stick forward, diving hard into the canyon floor, flares bursting from the hog's tail like white-hot blossoms. The missile veered, detonating against the cliffs in a fireball that painted the rock face orange. Shards of stone rained down, clattering off her fuselage. The Su-57 overshot, circling back with the grace of a falcon. Naomi's breath rasped in her mask. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't meet it head-on. Her only weapon was the very thing they mocked: her ability to fly slow, impossibly slow, hugging the earth like a shadow. As the Su-57 rolled in again, Naomi pulled back power-bleeding speed until the Hog trembled on the edge of a stall. The fighter screamed overhead, closing too fast to react, its sleek frame built for speed, betraying it in the narrow gorge. Naomi seized the moment. She yanked the stick, rolling the Hog onto its side, bringing the massive nose cannon into line. Her thumb pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger roared its voice a guttural thunder that shook the very air. A torrent of 30-millimeter rounds ripped from the Hog's nose, glowing tracers carving through the darkness. The sky lit with fire. The shells tore across the Su-57's flank, shredding through its port wing and engine nozzle. Sparks blossomed, then fire. The Predator jerked violently, its smooth silhouette fractured by smoke and flame. The pilot broke off in a desperate climb, trailing a black scar against the sky. Naomi had struck. She had crippled the most advanced fighter on the battlefield with a machine they had all dismissed. But victory came at a price. The Hog shuddered violently, alarms wailing across the cockpit. The stress of the brutal maneuvers and the shock wave from her own cannon run had ripped open old wounds in the airframe. Hydraulic pressure dropped into the red. The right wing surface controls lagged sluggish like an arm gone numb. Warning lights flashed in sickening rhythm damage that could not be ignored. Naomi gritted her teeth, fighting the stick as the Hog threatened to roll. Smoke trailed from her starboard side, the smell of scorched metal seeping into her mask. She steadied her breath, her body becoming one with the wounded beast. She had hurt the Predator, but she was bleeding too. Above, the Su-57 limped toward the horizon, still flying, but crippled, its pilot forced to retreat. Naomi's chest heaved, sweat stinging her eyes, but she allowed herself one fleeting thought. They called her obsolete. Tonight she had proved them wrong. The Hog was wounded. So was she. But both still had fight left. The mountains offered no mercy. The enemy had only begun to test her resolve. Through the haze of static, Spectre 9's final transmission clawed its way into Naomi's headset. Enemy armor. Breaching the line. 15 seconds, maybe less. The words dissolved into gunfire and a scream. Naomi's eyes locked onto her forward-looking infrared display. White-hot signatures swarmed across the ridgeline T-90 tanks, advancing like a line of steel beasts, their turrets already lowering toward the last position of the 12 trapped men. There was no more time, no more options. Naomi shoved the throttles forward, the Hog screaming in protest as it plunged from the night sky. The cockpit shook violently, alarms shrieking, but she kept the nose steady, lining up the target. Her thumb pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger unleashed its wrath, a sound less like a weapon and more like the tearing of the world itself. A stream of 30mm shells roared down, striking the lead tank with merciless precision. Armor peeled away like tin, the turret ripped clean from its hull and spun skyward before crashing down in flames. Another tank erupted ammunition, cooking off in a white-hot chain of detonations. Below, Spectre 9's surviving voices rose in disbelief. She's here, oh God! Hog 7 is on station. But the reprieve lasted seconds. The enemy reacted like a hive struck by fire. From high above, the surviving Su-57 swooped back into the fight, its sleek frame glittering in the moonlight. From the southern pass, 2 Mi-28 Havoc gunships rose like predators from the dark, their stubby wings heavy with rockets. And from the canyon floor, anti-air batteries lit up streams of red and green tracers clawing into the night sky. Naomi was at the center of a storm. Her Hog lurched left as cannon fire ripped through her wing. Warning tones screamed, hydraulic pressure critical. Engine 2 fire. The cockpit filled with the acrid sting of burning insulation. She bit back, panic. One breath. One focus. The first Havoc dove straight at her, its 30mm cannon spewing tracers. Naomi pulled the Hog head-on into its path, closing distance at suicidal speed. The gunship's pilot expected her to break away. She didn't. Her thumb found the trigger again. The Avenger spat fire, tearing the Havoc apart in midair. The helicopter exploded in a rolling fireball, debris rattling against her canopy. She flew straight through the cloud of smoke and flame, her Hog shuddering but alive. But the second Havoc swung wide, circling onto her tail. Its cannon rounds chewed through her fuselage, tearing away panels, shredding the tail into lace. Naomi gritted her teeth, blood running down her arm where shrapnel had sliced through her flight suit. The Hog moaned beneath her, crippled but not yet dead. Then came the shriek of the Su-57's missile lock. Alarms screamed the cockpit, flashing red. Naomi knew she had no flares left, no wingman to cover her, no clean escape. The Predator had her in its sights. It was then she made a desperate gamble. She slammed the throttle back, deployed the Hog's massive deceleron brakes. The aircraft bucked violently, the sudden drag nearly stalling it mid-air. Her body slammed against the harness, pain exploding in her wounded shoulder. The havoc behind her didn't expect it. The helicopter shot past momentum, carrying it directly into her nose's line of fire. Naomi squeezed the trigger one more time. The GRAU-8 coughed its last rounds, a short, brutal burst. The Havoc disintegrated in front of her, its rotor blades spinning away into the canyon like broken wings. But the maneuver cost her everything. The Hog dropped like a stone, shuddering, barely pulling out above the canyon floor. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across her console. Warning lights flashed in a furious chorus. She could feel the heat of fire crawling up from the starboard side. Blood dripped down her arm, soaking her glove, her breath ragged against the oxygen mask. The voiceover rose heavy with inevitability. This is the moment everyone believed she would die. High above the Su-57 lined up for its final dive, the hunter circling for the kill. Below, tracers clawed upward, filling the sky with fire. Naomi's Hog was broken, bleeding, her body screaming with pain. But her eyes burned steady. She had been mocked. She had been dismissed. She had been called obsolete. And yet here she was, in the heart of the storm, still flying. The ordeal was not over. It was only beginning. The Su-57 descended like a blade from the heavens, afterburners carving streaks of fire against the night sky. Naomi's Hog, bleeding smoke and shrapnel, had nothing left to give. Her guns were nearly empty. Her flares exhausted her controls, sluggish and heavy. She gripped the stick with blood-slick hands, her vision swimming. The Predator closed in its cannon, already spitting fire. Every tracer seemed to reach for her, each one promising to tear her apart. Naomi didn't flinch. She kept the Hog steady, bracing herself for the impact that never came. Instead, the world ahead erupted. A flash of searing orange lit the canyon, followed by a blossom of fire and debris scattering across the sky. The sleek silhouette of the Su-57 twisted violently, its frame breaking apart before crashing in flames against the granite cliffs. For a heartbeat, Naomi couldn't understand what had happened. Then a voice, ragged but triumphant, crackled into her headset. "Target down. Splash 1. Hog 7, we got him." She blinked, her breath catching in her throat. Down below, hidden in the rocks, one of Spectre 9's soldiers lowered the smoking tube of a FIM-92 Stinger missile from his shoulder. In the final moments, it hadn't been her cannon or her courage alone. It had been them, the men she had come to save, who had fired the shot that kept her alive. The irony hit her with a force stronger than any missile. She had fought her way through hell to save them, and in the end, they had become her wings. The bond was complete. Pilot and ground relic and survivor, no longer divided but one. The comms filled with voices, now voices that had been strained by terror, suddenly rising in joy. "Angel, you did it. She's still flying. God bless that." Hog Naomi let the words wash over her, but she could not summon an answer. Relief surged through her chest, so fierce it almost broke her. But it was tangled with exhaustion, so deep it felt like her bones had turned to lead. Every muscle trembled, every breath rattled. She glanced down at her controls. The right engine was dead. The left struggled, coughing and shuddering. Hydraulic fluid leaked, pulling dark and sticky at her feet. Warning lights still flared like dying stars across her panel. She was alive, but only just. Her eyes drifted to the horizon. For the first time in hours, there was no enemy shadow, no shriek of incoming missiles, no tracer fire. Only silence broken by her own ragged breathing. The Hog limped on, battered but unbroken. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, whispering inside her helmet. Not a prayer, not a boast, just a truth: we made it. She had fought the Predator and lived. She had saved 12 souls. She had kept her promise to Robert. But her victory was not hers alone. It was shared between a pilot and a squad of soldiers who had refused to surrender, between a machine they all called obsolete and the men who discovered its worth. Her comrades had become her wings. And though Naomi's body screamed with pain, though her aircraft trembled on the edge of death, she felt something she had not felt in years: belonging. The battle was over, but Naomi's war was not. The Hog limped through the night sky, its one surviving engine coughing and sputtering like an old heart barely holding on. Every mile toward Iron Valley Air Base felt like a negotiation with death. Warning lights still pulsed in the cockpit, hydraulic systems bled out, and smoke seeped through the vents, stinging her eyes. Naomi tightened her grip on the stick, her wounded arm screaming with every movement. She whispered through clenched teeth not to herself, but to the machine that had carried her this far. Just a little longer. Take me home. The first lights of the base glimmered on the horizon, a fragile constellation of safety in a world of darkness. Relief surged in her chest, but it was tempered with dread. Her landing gear indicators flashed red. The system was gone. There would be no wheels, no graceful touchdown, only steel against concrete. Griffin Tower, this is Hog 7, she rasped into the mic. Single engine. Hydraulics critical. Gear failure. Preparing for belly landing. The radio crackled with a reply, the controller's voice uncharacteristically soft. Solid copy, Hog 7. The field is yours. Emergency crews standing by. Welcome home, Captain. She guided the Hog onto final approach the runway, a dark ribbon stretching toward her. The wounded birds shook violently, fighting every command. Naomi's vision blurred, but she forced her focus sharp, keeping the nose level. This was no longer combat, it was survival for both of them. The ground rushed up. She held her breath. The impact came like thunder. Metal screamed as the Hog's belly scraped the concrete, sparks exploding into a blinding shower. The cockpit rattled, her body slammed forward against the harness, and smoke billowed in thick clouds behind her. The beast skidded the length of the runway, leaving a glowing scar of fire and steel in its wake. Finally, mercifully, the Hog groaned to a halt. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of burning fuel and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Naomi sat motionless, her chest heaving, listening to the dying hum of the one engine that had refused to quit. The canopy hissed open and cold night air swept in, carrying with it the scent of smoke and scorched metal. Naomi unclipped her harness, every muscle trembling. When she climbed down the ladder, her legs nearly gave way. She looked up and froze. Lined along the taxiway stood every pilot from the base. The young men who had mocked her, the officers who had dismissed her, the crews who had whispered that she was obsolete. None of them spoke. None of them jeered. They simply stood in silence, their faces stripped of arrogance, their eyes fixed on the wreck that had somehow brought her home. At the front of them was Major Steele, the man who had sneered at her every flight, who had called her Hog a relic. The runway was still alive with smoke when General Darius arrived. He was a man of granite, his uniform sharp, his gaze harder than steel. He walked past the fire crews and the broken Hog, stopping only when he stood directly before Naomi. For a moment, time seemed to still. Then slowly the general raised his hand in a crisp salute. It was not the salute of a general to a subordinate. It was not rank to rank. It was warrior to warrior. A gesture stripped bare of hierarchy, offered in recognition of the impossible. Naomi, swaying on her feet, blood seeping through her sleeve, lifted her own hand and returned it. Their eyes met, and in that silence the truth was spoken. She had done the impossible, and she had earned the respect no medal could bestow. But the silence did not last. Hours later, in the dim light of the command office, Naomi was summoned again. A colonel slid a folder across the table, his face unreadable. Inside was a single order, honorable discharge. The justification was cold bureaucratic. Her mission had been an exception, not doctrine. She was a liability, an anomaly that did not fit into the polished machinery of modern warfare. The words landed like another wound. After all she had given, after carrying a dying aircraft through hell and back, they wanted her gone. Not celebrated, erased. When the news spread through the base, outrage rippled like fire through dry grass. Pilots who had once mocked her now stood shoulder to shoulder, refusing to accept it. Ground crew spoke out, their voices fierce. Even Major Steele, eyes still haunted by what he had witnessed, stepped forward, his voice low but steady. She flew where none of us dared. If she leaves, then every one of us is smaller for it. The hangar that had once echoed with laughter now filled with solidarity. Prejudice cracked beneath the weight of truth. Naomi, who had been dismissed as obsolete, had become the measure of courage itself. She stood before them all, weary but unbroken. Her voice, though quiet, carried the strength of every mile she had flown that night. I don't need an aircraft to prove my worth. I did what had to be done. The words silenced the crowd, not with despair, but with reverence. She was more than a pilot now. She was proof that courage has no color, no gender, no expiration date. The hog behind her would never fly again. But Naomi Carter's fight had already risen beyond wings of steel. It now lived in the hearts of those who had seen her defy death, and in the eyes of every soul who understood that true valor can never be dismissed as an exception. The dawn broke over Iron Valley with a fragile light painting the jagged mountains in gold. On the far end of the runway, the hog rested in silence. Its fuselage was shredded one engine, a blackened ruin, its belly scarred from the landing. The proud beast had given everything, and yet something endured. Naomi stood beside the wreck, her flight suit torn, her body aching with wounds that would scar. As the sun rose higher, light spilled across her back, catching the ink that marked her skin. The eagle tattoo glimmered faintly, wings spread as if ready to take flight. Where steel had failed, spirit remained. She laid her hand on the hog's battered flank, the metal still warm, and whispered a single word: "Thank you." Around her, the base was alive with silence. Not jeers, not whispers, only respect. Pilots and crews stood in solemn rows, bearing witness not just to a machine's last stand, but to the truth it had carried home. An expert voice, calm, measured, reflective, seemed to echo through the scene, offering the truth that history often forgets. Wars change. Technology changes. But willpower and dignity never become obsolete. Naomi Carter had proven it. She had flown into a storm of fire with nothing but grit and faith, and she had returned. Not because she was invincible, not because her aircraft was flawless, but because courage itself cannot be erased. The camera pulled back, Naomi the eagle on her back, the broken hog behind her, in the rising sun before her. And then came the final line, sharp as a blade, unforgettable. Sometimes to save the future, you must trust the very thing the world was too quick to discard. The story lingered there, suspended in silence, before the voice softened into a final call. If this story touched you, like, share, comment, and subscribe, so no one forgets that human will is still the strongest weapon.